all, and I warmly welcome all of you to the 9th Urban Talk in the series of monthly talks on urban design, future challenges in urban living. These urban talks are open to all, and especially to all the allied fields of architecture, landscape, town planning, engineering, and urban transport, etc. It hopes to create an awareness of current challenges and trends in one's cities across the world, and how the cities evolve for better quality living, well-being, and safety from some of the solutions presented in previous urban designers from India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Hong Kong, China, and Canada. And I've highlighted some of these issues and challenges faced in their respective cities. Today's talk is on designing the Indian city, challenges and prospects. And now, with this brief introduction, I hand over the proceedings to architect Dr. Janaka Vijayasundara, the inaugural president of the Institute of Urban Designers, IUDSL, for the welcome speech and introduction to the theme. Over to you, Dr. Janaka.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much. Good evening to all of you, and warmly welcome to the 9th Urban webinar, Urban Talks, on the theme of urban design and future challenges. So, as we all aware that this institute conduct this series of discussions on the subject of urban design, particularly the trends, the current approaches, and how other countries and other institutes do urban design. And also it's a great opportunity for our members as well as the members of the other institutes to share with the experience that is brought by these eminent speakers. So one of the objectives of this institute is that to have strong links with the other institutions of urban designers, and also to look forward to work collaboratively in future times. So as we all know that we had been having with very strong links with different continents. We started from Germany, Singapore, Canada, Hong Kong, China, Malaysia, Thailand, and Nepal, and so on. So where we invited either pioneers or the founder members or the supporters of urban design institutions of those countries, or the past president or the president of, or the active professional members of those institutions. So thereby that we could experience that in certain countries, certain contexts, that how this urban design is happening, and also what are the frameworks and what are the legal frameworks, as well as what professional issues and future expectations are met. So in this context, I'm very proud to introduce our speaker of the forum today, Dr. Arunava Dasgupta. In fact, when I read his the CV, that I found that he's almost, we later discuss about this, that we both of you are having quite a bit of same roles. So it is very much great to meet with you, Dr. Arunava. And also I must thank to architect urban designer Jaspreet in, she must be here. So in the, from Delhi, so she's active urban designer, and who introduced me, Dr. Arunava. And so as a president of the Institute of Urban Designers, that I welcome him very warmly, and it's a very great pleasure. And when I read with in the Institute of Urban Designers in India, particularly when we formed this institute, and I could also refer to the various documents, including the company or the memorandum and so on. and then found that Arunava is one of the very early members. I think the institute was formed somewhere in 2007, as I remember, if I'm correct. And so Arunava was one of the members of the council at that time, and who was doing with these activities as well as education and so on. So, as an institute, I think it's about 13 years or 14 years of old. And also, as far as I know, that it's about 300 members so far, or more than that, perhaps. If Dr. Arunava is not going to cover any of this, I think it would be good for us to know that urban design as a profession, that many other countries, as we met with those representatives of the institutes, that it's something growing, and also it's a real need of this urban development for the urban development. So it was also our task that to form this institute, and also to see that how much we can contribute to the urban development for the betterment of the cities and also people. So therefore, it is a great, very much, I would be very much happy to have an Institute of Urban Designers to this forum. So let me very quickly share with some of the facts, as usually we discussed in this forum at the beginning, that where in terms of the population, that how the cities in size. So you can see the third one from top is New Delhi. So the third populated country according to this data. And in terms of the size, of course, Karachi is much smaller, but otherwise you could see that it's not compared to many other American cities, Australian cities. New Delhi is with the population, it's somewhat restricted development country. So I also looking at that, how you compare with Colombo, Delhi, because Delhi is the main topic for today's evening discussion. And of course, this may be the public opinion. So the blue is Colombo and red is Delhi. From various things that, people have identified various pluses and minuses, but of course, in terms of the general info, that Colombo is much ahead of India. Transportation almost in between, because of the traffic and all in India, you get traffic as well, and quality of living and so on. Environmentally, it looks like that Delhi is having either bigger points or so. So I'm not going to talk about much about these statistical data, but as usually we try to share with you in case that for you to understand about the basic statistical aspects of the city that we are going to hear. So India, Delhi also seems to be settled a long ago. It's BC times. And then capital city formation, 1911, and formation of the Union Territory, 1956. And then again, the formation of National Capital Territory, which is within the Delhi is within there, February 1st, 1992. So Delhi is having with 11 districts, and population is quite in the Union Territory. It's a little less than the entire, so 4 million or 4.5 million less than Sri Lankan population. So again, it's good to see that urban population is somewhat much higher, like in case of Delhi. And I'm sure that we'll be listening a lot of other details later with Dr. Arunava's presentation. So today's program is so that we will have about 1 hour 55 minutes for the event talks, speech by Dr. Arunava. And then there will be moderation and discussion. So let me also welcome our two eminent professionals, architect, planner, Dr. Lochana Gunaratna. He was the past president of the National Academy of Sciences, Institute of Town Planners and Institute of Architects. And it is a pleasure, Dr. Lochana, to have you with us. And then architect, urban designer Harshan De Silva. So he's also a council member of the Institute of Urban Designers. So he's currently working as secretary to the HE, the president on urban development, and also who was the former chairman of the Urban Development Authority of Sri Lanka. So we welcome Harshan and Dr. Lochana to this forum. And then, so towards the end that we would be finishing around 8:30 p.m. So now let me ask Michelle to start beginning from here, and hope you will enjoy the evening today. Thank you for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Janaka. And it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Arunava Dasgupta, who hails from Delhi, India. Dr. Arunava Dasgupta is an architect and urban designer currently heading the urban design program at the School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi, and is the coordinator for the Center of Urban Design Innovation. As a founder member and president of the Institute of Urban Designers, India, he has been actively promoting the idea of a holistic urban design through government agencies, NGOs, and educational institutes across the country, while creating alternate development frameworks using community participation as a central tool for local area design. Over the past 3 decades, he has been involved in multiple projects at diverse scales for a range of Indian cities and has been pursuing the larger question of the role of architects and designers beyond the city through applied research in rural and urban Himalayan settlements. He has been actively providing advocacy and design consultancy services to state and central government departments towards formulation of a sustainable development guidelines for settlements under transformation. He has co-curated, designed, and produced numerous exhibitions, including a public art festival in India. And within the academic arena, Dr. Dasgupta is involved in directing alternate design studio methodologies that encourage exploration by students as citizen designers. Finally, ongoing research and academic engagements include partnered projects with Heidelberg University, Trondheim, Norway, Cardiff University, and Birkbeck College, UK. He has lectured extensively in many institutions in India and in countries across the world. Over to you, Dr. Arunava Dasgupta.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My deepest appreciation and thanks to Mr. Janaka Vijaychandra and all the eminent delegates who have come here today to participate and discuss my presentation on the Indian city. It's been an honor for us as a representative of the Institute of Urban Design to be able to cross the boundaries and move into your domain in Sri Lanka, where your Institute of Urban Designers have embraced someone like me from India. Thank you so much. And I'm really hopeful that this is only the beginning of a long and very enriching journey that all of us will commit ourselves together. So this is an opportunity also for professionals across the subcontinent and around the world to find ways of converging and discussing issues as well as possibilities of our collective collaborative efforts towards making this world a better place. And I hope that this talk will find resonance in this collaborative journey that we would like to take with all of you. I am going to use Delhi as a case, as Mr. Janaka told us, to try and establish the way in which urban design as a profession or as a practice, as well as an educational discipline, have tried to enact as well as contribute to the developmental profile of a city like Delhi, and hopefully across the country also. Like Mr. Janaka said, we are an institute which is a young institute of about 13, 14 years. We have almost around 500 members, urban designers from across the country. And we are with around 7 or 8 centers spread and distributed across all the zones. We are trying to see whether the message of urban design and the approach to urban development can find a new path of how we can shape the future of our urban societies together. So that is the role that the Institute of Urban Designers have been playing. You would probably realize, like in many other parts of the world, especially in our zone, urban design is not necessarily a formally recognized discipline, and it has not found the kind of recognition it so deserves. The urban design program in SPA is more than 50 years old now. And given the fact that it was the first program at the master's level of urban design, we can safely say that we are now more than half a century old in terms of having this profession or as a discipline around in this area or in this country for some time or the other. Now, within this 50 years, it would have been time now for us to get recognized, to be formally put onto the government cadre and positions, and also to be able to define the role where urban designers, in complement with planners and other development specialists, can contribute to the making of better cities. I have mentioned earlier in many forums that the role of urban designers probably has been a quieter role, a quiet role in the very, very hyper world of development, especially urban development, the hyperactive world of urban development. This quieter role has a reason to start getting visible. So no matter whether our cities have been planned or even in our pre-planning days, the role of design in cities, I feel, have always been one of the primary inputs in shaping the way in which the urban environment would finally portray itself as. And this is what I feel has been a constant thread of the way our cities get identified even today. So it's not just about the advent of planning and the way in which modern planning has recast urban development processes, but it is also actually about the way in which design inputs have helped in the shaping of cities. So anyway, that was probably the story of the past. In my talk, I would try to see whether we can bring out a little bit on the planning trajectory of a city like Delhi, and synonymous to that, the way in which quiet urban design inputs have tried to play a role, and where the shift probably has happened in making urban design now coming into the foreground of many kinds of decisions that our cities are taking. So hopefully that is what the talk will cover. I will, if you allow me, I will share my screen and I'll try to see whether we can. My screen is visible. So I'm putting forward this idea about designing the Indian city. We know that the Indian city has been planned all through the last 75 years at least. And we feel that parallel to the planning of the Indian city, this idea about design and design inputs should also be considered simultaneously. And this is a small journey for us. We enter the global city of Delhi through its globally renowned entry point of the gateway of the T3 terminal, as it is called nowadays. The making of the 3-3 terminal itself was an announcement to the world that Delhi has arrived or is going to be a part of the global scenario of cities which we call as world cities. And Delhi's aspiration to be a world city has made within itself or created within itself the real impetus of what kind of development profile Delhi as the capital city of India will take. And through Delhi, the rest of India will also try to get defined. The capital city of Delhi, as you know, and we have read in many times before, historically was called as the 7 cities of Delhi. And right from pre-Mughal times, right from the Indraprastha times, we have found that Delhi have had various kinds of settlements in different locations in this geography between the ridge on the left-hand side of your map, as well, and the river on the right-hand side of the map. Nestled between the ridge and the ridge is a part of the Aravallis that come from Rajasthan and move up towards the Himalayas. Nestled within this formation of geography, the very pattern of Delhi had emerged across centuries. And the 7 cities of Delhi, over time, found its expression and are embedded within the larger fabric that the city is all about today. But today, Delhi is not just about 7 cities of Delhi. It is today Delhi and 5 cities. So the city today is almost like a mega city region where cities around Delhi have started becoming a part and parcel of the larger agglomeration of what we call the national capital region of Delhi. So we have Delhi, Gurgaon, Faridabad, Noida and Greater Noida, Ghaziabad, and to a certain extent even Rohtak, who are all engulfed within this larger urban domain with Delhi as the epicenter of it. And this larger shift from a metropolitan city to a city region itself has many ramifications on the way in which Delhi faces the challenges of how to progress through time. Delhi is a city of history, and these historic layers of the city are visible across all its different parcels. If you take a slice of the city of any kind, we will find that the living medieval traditional city of Arunava is in a way at the core of the city, followed by the colonial city of the British, and then all around this ensemble of the Mughal city and the colonial city, we have the post-independent city after the independence that we had celebrated, and then the further expansion of the expanded city into the hinterland. Each of these city layers have corresponding physical, morphological layers. And that is why Delhi gets a very strong identity of its physicality. The traditional medieval layer, it was a walled city and is a walled city. And within the walls of Delhi, though we don't see the walls as much today, we find that there is a throbbing, vibrant, dynamic city that over all these centuries has still played its continuous role. A role of adaptation and a role of assimilation with the city that keeps on engulfing around it. We then had the colonial city or the colonial capital, which added to the city the Baroque layer. And from that point of time, we realized this idea of colonial grandness, the monumentality of an urban scheme of things. And that then got followed by the city layers of planning or the planned city, which was brought in with the advent of the British, and it got continued further with great momentum as we gained independence. So the 3 layers of the medieval city, the colonial city, and the post-independence city then spread into the hinterland in what we call the suburban or the edge city, engulfing villages and trapping them within their midst. We have now villages that are now called urban villages. A very strange kind of a term, but you must be familiar with it in our part of the world. This idea of the urban village has become synonymous with so many cities that have grown horizontally and taken over many areas that have been surrounding that city. So when we look at the city and we see its expression, especially its physical expression, we find that the British colonial city stands in the middle of a great departure from what the traditional kind of Indian urbanism was known to be, to a totally different, almost a reversal of that kind of urbanism that came about with the colonial imprint. And this colonial city had for itself many kinds of departures. One of the departures, for example, was in the sheer idea of what a transport or movement corridor would be like. On a map on the side, you can see the colonial imprint as against the shaded areas on the north, where the medieval city was. A slight distance from the so-called brown city or the native city is when the white city came up. And this white city, with its own levels of axial geometry and a certain kind of order, implanted within the Indian scheme of urbanism a certain approach that we all have a legacy of. So the British city or the colonial city with wide avenues of trees and motorable roads, in sharp contrast to the roads with people and activities and of all kinds of functions happening in it, became the first precursor to the dualism of Indian urbanism. The homebred Indian medieval quality as compared to the imported European urbanism that became a part of our entire tradition. Moving beyond that and into today's era, we now find the planned city of so-called post-independent India. And this planned city has now moved all around large region, as I said, as a mega city region that we can confront with today. These cities have also created strong spatial entities, iconic in their nature. The medieval city had what we call Chandni Chowk, and the British city had as its nerve center Connaught Place. One designed as a street, moving from the Red Fort, the place of royalty, to the masjid or the Fatehpuri Masjid, the place of religion on the other end. And this street has been a celebrated street identifying urban India through centuries. Simultaneously, Connaught Place as an ensemble of a designed entity, very strongly manicured to give a unified language of British India, was seen to be a follower of what we had seen in the past. So urban spaces and spatial design happened parallel to planned layouts. The pre-planned city and the planned city both had within them very strong embedded features of spatial design. And it is this quality of spatial design that I would say has become one of our primary forefathers of an urban design way of engaging with the city. That the city is about people, and there would be places for people to collect, gather, celebrate, and thrive, has been the ethos of any kind of city, especially in our part of the world. And that's why the planned city has also been the design city. But we haven't really focused on what the design progressions have been. So from what Chandni Chowk was conceived to be and what Chandni Chowk became is a story in time. And I think that's the story that will keep unfolding later on also. But one of the grandest spaces that India advertises to the world is this central space of Delhi, which we call the Central Vista. And this is, as I said, the strongest imprint of British colonial India. And it is in this Central Vista that we found that the new image of the city, of the capital city of Delhi in the new era of independent India continued. So independent India made this space become their space, though it had its colonial origin and also colonial imprints of design. But it became their own space at the turn of independence. And from that time onwards, there was a way in which this space with a history of an alien kingdom brought in to India became also an Indian space. And this idea of progression through time and its an evolution of the city by assimilating layers of history that preceded it has been a characteristic of many of our cities all around this part of the world at least. So today, this is also a ceremonial space, a space of great grandeur. And as you know that every 26th January, we celebrate this space to showcase India in all its glory. So a space meant for a national pride, as well as spaces which are for everyday existence, become then the backbone of a spatial way of looking at the cities. So the grandness of Central Vista on one end, and the small little spaces of everydayness in every city all across the country has been today, I feel, one of the lifelines of how our cities operate. Though whether they are planned or whether they are pre-planned, every city connotes within themselves the idea of public urban life. And this everyday life gives way to ritual celebrations. So at times, we see the transformation of an everyday space like a park or a playground becoming a great grand ritual space. And so also with the street, when it also starts celebrating into this kind of grandness. This happens in many parts of the country, and I'm sure it happens in your country too. And I'm saying that this is the kind of transition that we always see our spaces go through. So when Durga Puja gets celebrated in autumn in Kolkata, we find that there is this huge shift from an everyday way of looking at spaces and functioning within them to a specially derived and a special way in which we associate it collectively. This idea of everyday association and celebratory association becomes synonymous with the same space. And that, I think, also is one very vital element that we could see. So this idea about the ritual and the everyday, the cyclic nature of spaces from the daily cycle to the autumnal or to the yearly cycle, or to even a cycle that happens once in 12 years or once in 14 years, I think is a way in which our cities get characterized by. And that is when we start realizing the value of spaces as places. So the idea that the space in a city becomes a place for somebody in the city, I think is something that urban designers become a very important tool or a very important agency to realize. And from there on, we start questioning ourselves, what kind of a city do we have? And if we find in any slice of the Indian city, especially in a city like Delhi, places where there are hospitals, there is an urban village, there is a historic city ruin, there is also other villages with city greens, there are planned residential colonies and group housing all over. We ask ourselves, is this a city? Or what kind of a city is this? And then we start thinking ourselves, what can be the way in which we handle or tackle a city which is so simultaneous in all its ways of functioning and imbibing different kinds of layers within itself? So what could we do to make sense of that confusion that is seemingly characteristic of our cities? That's a question that has happened in all our minds all through. As we see, the Indian city is a multi-layered, plural, diverse, complex assembly of human enterprise and action, which through centuries has charted its unique processes of negotiated urbanism, interspersed with formal development inputs. It is not just the formal planning that makes the Indian city, but it is this negotiated urbanism between the formal and the rest of it that makes the Indian city be what it is. So we have cities of juxtaposition, and we also have cities of evolution. The planning history of our cities after independence is only a small, short history, as we know, in the evolutional path that our cities have gone through over time. And this small history of planning is still trying to grapple with the way in which juxtapositions in cities have been encountered, and what we can do with them. But this kind of a planning mechanism brought from European planning standards and then put into place also created with us cities of prescription, right? Where our cities were prescribed by standards, principles, norms, regulations, and laws, which were not necessarily intrinsically emerging from the idea of the urbanism that we had before. But in all this, our cities remained places of accommodation. Whether they are planned or ordered, whether they are prescribed or juxtaposed, we still found that our cities have remained receptacles of population coming in hordes into your cities and wanting to find their life, a new life over there. So the fruits of the master plan or the era of master planning in the city have had mixed outcomes. In some cases, we have had very positive ways in which our cities have got reshaped. But at times, we've realized that there are gaps with realities that are ever expanding as we keep moving in time. So there is always this catch-up scenario of what our cities are unfolding to be themselves and what planning can do to keep shaping our cities as the cities keep moving on. So it's a race against the city itself, where the city keeps moving on in its own pace, and we try to keep pace with it through planning endeavors. In a way, it is a little bit of a dichotomy, because planning was supposed to preempt how the city will be. And here we keep finding that planning is following in many ways the development realities that a city is going through. I'll come to that a little later, but we realize that the dual city happens simultaneously all the time, the spontaneous one and the ordered one, and at many times they're in conflict with each other. And this ordering is not just the historic ordering, but the planned ordering today. And then we see that we have, therefore, a choice for development. And this choice came with us, especially when we gained our independence, when our first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, had said that this will be a country which will look forward into the future. Industrialization became one of the primary bedrocks of how India will progress. And with industrialization, the idea of urbanization, along with democracy in New India. And it is then when the planned city started becoming even more of a reality. So this idea about the planned city versus the unplanned and the dualities that came with it did not leave us. 1962 is when we had the first master plan. And every 20 years almost, we've had subsequent master plans, which we realized that we would then start shaping our cities with a 20-year horizon. We now have the 2021 master plan, which is giving way or taking shape to the 2041 master plan. And very recently, the draft land use plan for Delhi or the master plan of Delhi have come out. And we are now trying to see what the 20 years of our future of this city will be like. The first master plan had a full team of the Ford Foundation coming in with Americans and the British planners, and a larger team also of Indian planners trained in Europe and America. And this composite team became responsible for the way in which the first master plan of Delhi would be comprehended. And within the first master plan, therefore, there were many kinds of aspects which we inherited in the subsequent master plans. The next few master plans went into ways in which the city will expand, cover larger zones, distribute places of work, as well as commerce, and a full hierarchy of functions that will be dependent on population sizes. And that became our primary planning trajectory. The manifestations of this kind of a planned city, especially with the way in which planning brought in changes with the earlier form of pre-planned urbanism that we had, was this question of a controlled city with zoned functions which are zoned from place to place. So the first separation of commerce with residence, which we had not been used to before, started with the way in which the British city started defining the separation. And here we see in the same city of colonial India, in Latin's Delhi, The commercial core is distinctly different from the residential bungalows, which we call the Latins bungalow zone. And that separation became one of the primary principles that we followed later on. So residential areas remained residential or became almost totally residential, with some ingredients of daily necessities that were distributed within part of them. Commercial areas or institutional areas were zoned in other parts of the city, distanced away from residential areas. And maybe that is one of the reasons why today Delhi is a city of commute, because we have to move long distances from where we stay to where our institutions are. All kinds of institutions, whether they're governmental, whether they're educational, whether there are any other private institutions that we have. And many other places of zoned areas of commerce started coming up in line with what we had seen before. There were also industrial zones embedded within larger residential pockets. And most of the concentrations of the industry happened within such kind of zones. So we were not talking at all of any kind of mixes of uses or mixed functions that our predecessors in our pre-planned eras had shown to be very effective in the way we lived. In some ways, this is the departure that our Indian cities adopted over time from here onwards. And that gave rise to different kinds of enclaves. And some of these enclaves also became insulated or insular in nature, gated in many ways. And at the periphery of our cities, we found there were even larger dispositions of singular functions, occupying large territories of our hinterland. There were other kinds of manifestations. The manifestations of the problems of publicness on streets, because the streets were now seen to be roads for mobility rather than streets for urban life. And that kind of a departure also created within us this very strong question of, is this the city for people or for cars or the automobile? Today, we know that the city of Delhi is one of the highest automobile populated cities. In fact, Delhi has the highest range of automobiles compared to all our other three metropolitan giant cities put together, and even more than that. And that's when we realized that there was a problem in the way this kind of a planning mechanism and the way our spontaneous growth of the city was generated. In 2006, the High Court of Delhi said that there was too much of violations of the master plan happening in this city, and that all violations of the master plan will have to then cease to operate. Delhi went through what is called the ceiling drive, and more than 40,000 commercial establishments, many industries all around, educational institutions which were performing, but they were not in designated land uses as per the master plan, had to be shut down and sealed. And this happened almost overnight. Through decades of planning, we had planned the city, but we had not necessarily ensured that as per the plan, all amenities in all locations would be evenly distributed so that there was no need for any further kind of development to happen within such localities. Many of these localities took up need-based commerce, need-based work areas, and need-based functions, which the planning system had not incorporated. There was also this entire question of at what scale are we defining functions? The master plan was for the entire city of Delhi. But here we were talking about localities. But that large wash of the master plan land use, the color, was affecting every locality in terms of what it was. The abstract land use plan and the real urban space had a conflict inherent within it. And this is when we saw the flashpoint of the ceiling drive that happened all over the city. In market areas, in institutional areas, in residential areas. And from 2006, in various cycles, Delhi is going through this very brutal way of closing itself. 2017-18, we saw another wave of sealing of functions happening. So the master plan as a legal document then came to be known to every citizen of Delhi and the power of the master plan was felt across the city. K.T. Ravindran, one of our leading voices in urban design, have been talking about this for quite some time. And he says through strict monofunctional zoning and the absence of follow-up urban design of building typology, the master plan failed to protect the residential quality as well as criminalize the small entrepreneurs who are priced out of the market and are left with no option but to operate from the already overcrowded homes. Strict zoning, as prescribed in the master plan to start with, is a violation of the lifestyle of Indian people and the economic propensities of our metropolitan cities. And that's what became a point of discussion and argument in many of our forum about the future of our Indian city itself. The first two master plans also talked about expansion of the city because of trying to accommodate the extra population that were coming into the city from all over the country. It created what is called sub-cities at the periphery of the city. And some of these sub-cities, like Rohini and Dwarka, started learning from the mistakes of the earlier plan. And in the plans that came up later, in places like Rohini, Dwarka, and Narela, we could see now that the streets started becoming places of commerce, very much like the earlier cities used to. Residential areas were bounded by public amenities all around it. And there would be then a residential core and a public periphery. And this kind of a system, as emerging from our pre-colonial days of urbanism, seems to have been one of the lessons that many of our cities have started learning. The idea of the chalk as a public zone, the idea of the street again as a life corridor, these I think started becoming inherent in many of our plans. So whether it be Dwarka or whether it's Rohini, though we had sectoral planning, we also had very strong corridor-based public amenities and their distributions, which was itself a departure from the strict zoning mechanism that we saw before. So from one side, we talk about this larger canvas of the way our cities have been planned and evolving through planning mechanisms. And in other ways, we are also looking at places that are getting made. Through the history of planning, we found that there were these very important district centers, which were supposed to be of a population size of 10 lakhs or so, which would hopefully accommodate all the work needs as well as the retail needs of the surrounding population in a certain hierarchy. Many district centers got planned, some of them got implemented. Nehru Place is one of the foremost that came up in that period of time. This particular exercise started showcasing the idea of urban design as an entity for large-scale architectural projects. In this case in Nehru Place, every unit of a building that you see, the vertical unit of a building, is a separate building unit. But they're all combined together with a facade control and a control of plan that allows the building to be public in the lower two floors and then progressively private as we move on. So this was one of the first assemblies of units of architecture becoming of a complete whole, very much like Connaught Place. And the lessons from Connaught Place started spreading as a design exercise within larger planning systems, not recognized as urban design inputs, but clearly through urban designers, as well as architects joining hands along with planners. So here we see a situation where the formal idea of planning and the space for informality has started coming into shape in the way in which modern cities in India, especially through Delhi, started generating. And this we saw in many scales across all the various localities. There was a hierarchy of commercial enterprises where district centers, community centers, local commercial centers, and even dot lots started getting created in the 60s and 70s urban design ideas of free pedestrian space and public functions that surround pedestrian space. And these were grand examples of how public placemaking was getting ingrained within the larger idea about metropolitan city planning. Placemaking in planned Delhi kept moving on across time. And one of the nicest examples of placemaking was when one of the nalas or the water systems in Delhi got covered, and a part of it got generated as what was called the Delhi Heart, which was essentially mimicking the bazaar of the traditional city, but bringing it into an atmosphere of the planned city. Delhi Heart became one of the most successful public destinations, and then it started spawning many other such kind of Delhi Hearts in different parts of the city, in East Delhi, in North Delhi, in many places. And we found that that was one of the ways in which new places in new India was getting shaped for people to come to and celebrate. Similar kind of examples were seen when we consolidated individual plots into larger conglomeration of plots and created what was called, in this case, the India Habitat Center. And many people probably have visited it, you know about it, and this is a spectacular example of modern architecture, urban design, and the frameworks of planning, allowing places to get developed for people to come to. And we thought that that is probably one of the best ways in which we could see how the Indian city would generate itself. So when we go back to the choices of development, the recent master plans started moving beyond just serving the people of Delhi only, but to also project the city in the global arena. 2021 master plan talked about the world-class global city, and it had within its own vision statement the making of the global city as one of the predominant aspects that the city would be. But the making of a global city carries with it a lot of other aspects of global influence and also practices. And that then we start seeing in different manifestations. Along with the global city, we wanted a city which was clean and slumless. And we wanted to project an image of a city which would not talk about its earlier realities. So the global, clean, slumless city then progressively started talking about this dual confrontation of a no tolerance question versus an acceptance question. The idea of negotiation became more and more vivid when we started looking at this city, the negotiated city with the planned city. And that city then started showing its divergent qualities between the poor and the rich, between the people who had everything and the people who probably did not have access to many things. Simultaneously, problems of the city kept on adding up. Today, Delhi is one of the most polluted cities in the world. I do not know whether we could get any higher brownie points than Colombo, but we know that this city has been designated as one of the most polluted ones. It is also a city which is congested with too much of automobiles on the roads. It's a city which also has its iniquities. Environmentally, we have a lot to look at. The river and the city has had a contentious relationship over all these years. And there has been constantly this pressure on this ecological corridor that was the sustaining backbone of the city at one time to now become more and more so-called global and urban. And that is when we start realizing that the problem probably lies in the way we have been planning without looking at the essential attributes and the urban realities of many of our parts of our cities. The problem was also scaled from the master plan to the zonal plan to the local plan. The local plan has never happened. In 70 years of our planning, we still in Delhi do not have localities with their own plans. And we're hoping that the city someday will be able to make a planning and design scenario for every locality that it inhabits. That is probably because of the distance view that we take of the city. The distance view from where we are as planners and designers, and we start looking at the city from way above and then look at the planning scenario. As against the everyday view, which is grounded and where we belong. So this question of the planning view from a distance and a design view from within needs to probably have a way of converging. And this convergence of the two ways in which we look at the city is going to hopefully give us outcomes of the way we shape futures of the city. Our cities, after the global dream, started getting shaped by mega dreams. And these mega dreams created mega transformations. The 1982 Asiad was the first outcome of such a dream. And at that point of time, we saw in Delhi many kinds of projects coming up, large-scale urban projects, architectural as well as infrastructural. And these large-scale projects became even more larger when we went to the next episode of our global event, the Commonwealth Games in 2010. So from 1980s to 2010, we found that there was another way in which we could aspire to become part of the global map. These mega transformations brought with it some very stark realities of making transformation happen. And at that point of time, during the Commonwealth Games, we know that we achieved a cleaner city, but the process of cleansing the city itself has a lot to ask about where and how should our priorities get enacted upon. So from that time onwards, from the 1990s to the 2000s, we have a whole lot of resettlements of the urban poor nestled within their own cities to be pushed into the periphery and taken away from where they were. And there were sites of eviction, there were sites of clearances, there were sites of relocation and resettlement into places which are far away from the city core within which these people found their day-to-day livelihood. Savdaghera is one of such locations. And in this kind of a location, this was the format in which people would be pushed into and live now, far removed from the places of livelihood. And this was simultaneous to our dream and aspiration of becoming global. So the human city and the global city were obviously in contradiction or even confrontation with each other. Another mega dream that we had in our city, which has now got unfolded very strongly, is the advent of the metro system. The metro brought within it waves of change. And these changes got manifested in local urban fabric. Metro became the main vehicle where the 7 cities inside Delhi became the 5 cities and Delhi. Because all around the 5 cities that we have now across Delhi, our metro lines penetrated right from the beginning. So in our case, the metro as a system is not an intra-city mobility mechanism. It is actually an intercity mobility mechanism, which is very different from in many places where public movement or transportation systems are conceived. So from the beginning, at the time when the metro came up, we had population transfer happening from all our peripheral cities within the metropolitan city. And this kind of a transfer to and fro on a daily basis made us the city region, the metropolitan city region, not just the metropolitan city itself. So the metro brought with it one of the largest factors of change. From the School of Planning and Architecture, we did a study of about 40 metro station locations from all the primary corridors of the city, choosing different points of locational criteria: the city core, the inner city, the outer city, the border area, and the extended city or the border city itself. And we found the way in which this metro was keeping on changing every part of the city from where it was traversing. The urban form of the city was changing. The metro system itself was creating a huge imposition in the kind of urban quality that we had before. And from that perspective, we started looking at the city from a different level altogether. The high ground of the metro station is an elevated plane as compared to the ground plane that we were used to. And from that plane, the city started behaving and looking in a different perspective. From that elevated plane, we come down to ground. And the ground then greets us with the kind and waves of change that design spaces around the station unfold into. So at every point of time, we find that these mega dreams with mega projects are reshaping cities through design entities of urban scale. There again, urban designers, architects play the quiet role of transformation. Building types got introduced, policies got reenacted, and now today we have a transit-oriented development policy because the metro came up, and around the metro, we wanted to reshape development. This has not happened through planning leading the way. The master plan did not conceive the metro. The metro came as a project, and the master plan was following the way the project was wanting to make the city change. Policies started happening parallel to the master planning process in the city. And these were development policies with clear guidelines of how the city areas should start changing. These are very recent policies that have started shaping up. Some of them are very progressive ones. They try to bring back to the city the space for people. But we have various kinds of questions related to who the city will be for, where all the metro corridors move through. Today, we also see the examples of grandness. Every such transit point, as you see in the lower photographs, are being reimagined to become grand spectacles of developmental profiles in the name of transit-oriented development that we have. And these transit-oriented development proposals are giving the possibility of larger and larger urban design engagement with city fabric. How they will be coming into fold is a work in progress, but it has at least got unleashed. And this kind of a force of change unleashed into the urban fabric has happened in many ways. The mobility system in the city was experimenting with different forms of public mobility. The BRT corridor, the bus rapid system or transit system corridor, came into existence, did not work, created greater confusions than creating smoothness. And we found out that that city then had many other problems to face. I'm very sorry, I think just a second. I have a feeling that we have gone back. Yeah, okay. So we have also done a trial and error of large infrastructure projects where some things work and some things don't. And today the BRT system has been abandoned. In some places, it is being thought to be repositioned and realigned and brought back. But we are moving through this project-driven way of looking at the city and its changes. The monorail will come. The BRT has already come into picture. The metro rail has already created its own waves of change. And we are hoping to see a city which has got many, many ways in which it will start transforming. Along with the mobility corridors, we are also seeing ecological corridors, Nala projects in the city, or where the river channels had been at one time, are also being put into place now to go through redevelopment work. There are goals and objectives to improve the ecological base of the city, considering the kind of flooding that happens, the kind of pollution that we are already facing. And there are some very strong aspirations that these corridors will start becoming newly rejuvenated places of ecological prominence. There are also areas within the city which need regeneration. And there have been ways and examples, for example, in the Basti of Nizamuddin, where a long-drawn process of community-driven redevelopment exercise and regeneration exercise has created worthwhile differences. So we see that in many ways, there has been manners in which the formal processes of urban development and the quieter ways of design engagement has continuously moved on. I'll come to this final bit of how this kind of approach has resulted in a departure from a planned city to a projectized city. Around 2005, the Ministry of Urban Development started what is called the Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission, National Urban Renewal Mission, which looked at the way in which our cities will get renewed in some way or the other. And that mission had within itself a very strong agenda of allowing certain reforms to happen, as well as projects to be identified in many cities across the country. The JNNURM also created for itself a document called the City Development Plan. And this City Development Plan was in many ways parallel to the master plan, but not necessarily following it. That was the beginning of the departure from planning to projects of the city. We now have many missions. The Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is a residential affordable housing mission. We know about the Smart City mission. The JNNURM has now become Amrut. For heritage cities, there is one more mission. The rural areas also have their own missions. I don't want to get into details of each of them, but every mission has its own target of fulfillment of certain objectives in the urban sphere. The Smart City mission is one very strongly advocated mission that we're seeing in 100 cities and even more in the country. And we're hoping that it is the missions now, rather than the master plan, that will now make a difference for all our cities. So from that point onwards till now, we find that there will be a different mechanism of developmental processes. Strangely enough, these missions have brought into fore urban design inputs, where the making of a place, the unmaking of it, and the remaking of these places have now been handled or being handled by architects, planners, and urban designers simultaneously, as the missions are asking and demanding from every city. There is a financial input, and therefore also there is the input for change. We go back to India Gate. We go back to the space which we had inherited from colonial India and made it ours. It was one of the most popular spaces the Delhiites aligned themselves to and associated with. The British made the place. Independent India remade the place for themselves. And in many ways, the colonial imprint of that era continued physically. The social mechanism of that place started giving way to a new way of engagement. It is not just that we host the Republic Day parade here. It is also the place where we celebrate the International Yoga Day now. It is the space where we tell the world that this is what India has to offer. This is also the place where Indians and Delhiites gather together to give visibility to concerns and to apprehensions that are there in our society. It has been the anchor of urban life. And that is why this is one of the most important spaces that Delhi had cherished. This space is going to get remade again. And in this remaking, urban design inputs has started playing another larger, grander role than it has happened over time in all the 60 to 70 years. Today, we have a grand project unfolding in Central Vista, where many of our buildings that were aligning those the two sides of the central axis are getting demolished or are slated to get demolished, and new buildings of governance will come into being. Many of the earlier buildings are getting commissioned to become new buildings. Government buildings which held ministries of finance and defense will become museums of tomorrow. And there will be new buildings which will now call itself the central core of the city of Delhi. The Central Vista is now in the making. To the right, you find how the Central Vista happened from the British period onwards, from bottom to top. You had the British beginning, the genesis of it, the post-independence India in the middle, as it is today, and the way it is proposed and envisioned tomorrow. And today, India, therefore, is shaping to welcome a new era of placemaking. It has not only happened in this part alone, it's happening in many other parts. We talked about the two iconic spaces of Delhi, the Central Vista at one end, Chandni Chowk at the other end. And Chandni Chowk itself, over time, went through all kinds of layers of transformation. when the British put in the railway station where the Queen's Garden was, the Jayanara Park was. And that park then became a place where the town hall as well as the railway station greeted each other. From the town hall, a new street was carved to Jama Masjid. This space, both as the everyday space of free India or Mughal India, as well as the ritual space, is now also going through basis of change. So what was historic Chandni Chowk is now becoming new Chandni Chowk, or a reformed Chandni Chowk. And the process of reformation has begun. It is taking shape, and it is almost unfolded in a way in which now we say that there is a new urban design scheme already implemented. We have done this in many other parts also. In this case, government-owned residential colonies are going through makeovers from what it was in the past to what it is going to be now. And we now see a large way, large tracts of land, being remade or unmade first and remade again by simple erasure of the urban fabric that preceded it. There was an urban fabric, both natural as well as man-made, both green as well as built. All of that are getting erased and then implanted back with a new form in all the areas that we see. And in many of them, we have all a role to play. So this is what on the left, the government colonies would be looking like before they would be erased and get replaced by the ones on the right. And it is not just here that we see this new phase of placemaking. The unmaking of a place, the remaking of a place. This is Varanasi. And a new space has been carved from the earlier fabric, from the Kashi Vishwanath temple on your left to the river Ganga on your right. And this space has been generated after carving out that large area from the tightly woven urban fabric of its historic part or historic past. And that's the way in which some of the urban design schemes for iconic India through iconic projects are coming into shape. Jagannath Puri in Orissa, as well as in many other parts in India, we find these kind of large-scale projects taking shape. Many new inputs have started coming up. All our railway stations, or I wouldn't say all, many of our railway stations are also into makeovers. And they are going to become strong hubs of multi-transit mobility. These processes are already put into place, and these processes are giving us, very strangely, a different way of looking at the city. So who makes the city? That's a question that we keep on asking us. Is it the government? Is it the global forces? Is it city authorities? Is it people themselves? Architects, planners, designers? And that's the question we've been asking in the Urban Design Forum continuously. What is the missing link between master planning and the ground reality that we see? And can we have a city with visions, ideas, and concepts, which we would call our city? We know that urban design is a bridging discipline. It's an in-between discipline between art, utility, micro scale and macro scale, planning and architecture. We see it as a mediating discipline between public and private, between creation of wealth and public good, between governments and communities. And we also see it as a balancing discipline. Environment and development, global and local, ideals and actions. And this is, some way where we feel that the urban design profession and the practice of urban design can move on. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak all of that with respect to Delhi. My closing statement here would be, can we work with communities? Is there a way to approach the city from the communities upwards? Can we reverse the process where the community starts becoming the central part of decision-making? Conventional planning started from master plan scale down to the local, which it never reached. Can we have now local area planning finally meeting the master plan scale? We tried to do this exercise over the last 10 to 12 years, over 22 wards in the city of Delhi from the Department of Urban Design. where students went into localities, created frameworks of engaging with communities, finding out where their problems are, what their aspirations could be, how to bring them together to causes related to their own places of residence and inhabitation or even business, and then transacting with them the possibilities of change that could happen there through their appraisal as well as through our inputs of creative work. And this is when we found out that maybe there is also an alternate approach of approaching the city from people upwards. And these are all ways in which we feel that we can help make a new city grow. A prospect for the future city is to confront city realities, not avoid them. The city for the poor, as I told you, in Sabdagera, could be reimagined for the kind of people who have been shifted there, but making sure that their lives now are not a life living in barracks, but a life in which they can find their own livelihood with the places of stay. We can have cities where our citizens do not remain invisible and outside the purview of development. And we find that there are ways in which we can study them, we can observe them closely, find out about their relationships and networks with cities, and then also help propose some ways in which we can bring them together. We can help increase the idea of belongingness, of place association. We can create cities that are for people and with people. And then we can also look at how to democratize the city of New Delhi through all the processes that it is going through today, the unmaking and the remaking of democratic city capital that we have. I feel that today we have come to a juncture where we will start looking at our realities much more closely than looking at cities from the largest perspective and then hopefully reach here. I feel today that there is a need for our cities to be looked from a design perspective and then shake hands with planning policies and frameworks. And from there on, we hope that we will create a city for all, a city for women, a city for children, a city for the inhabitants that becomes part of them. We have tried all of that in our studios. We are trying to bring them to the public domain in many ways. And we see now that the Indian city, the Asian city, would have already inherited principles of compactness, heterogeneity, climate responsiveness, as well as ideas of robustness, people-driven, nature-oriented, and resilient. Today, we want to make them smart, but can we make them all together? Can the future Indian city not have to divorce itself from the qualities of its past and become also a factor of the future through embracing any one more layer or any further layers that it has? It has to be a place for people. Thank you. This is what our smart cities are doing, from the bazaar to the smartness of the bazaar. And we felt that this is probably the way in which we can all be smart together. Thank you so much for your patience. I'm sorry it took a long time for me to express this very gigantic topic of the city of Delhi. I hope it has in some way given you a little bit of insight of what the city and its trajectory of development has been. Thank you.
Dr. Dasgupta, firstly for your opening statement, a unique one of your belief that urban design should make the world a better place, or attempt to, and collectively linking this up with the other institutes in the world, which also Dr. Janaka spoke of at the beginning. And thank you also for your very comprehensive, informative, and very interesting presentation, and for taking us through the layered evolving of a historic landmark city in India. Sri Lanka also here and been in the private practice for 40 years. He's the author of many peer-reviewed publications. His most recent book, which dealt mainly with the built environment in South Asia, was published internationally by Springer in 2019. And our second moderator is architect, urban designer Harshan De Silva, who is a fellow of the Sri Lanka Institute of Architects. He's the additional secretary to HE, the president on urban development, and the former chairman of the Urban Development Authority. Before handing over the proceedings to them, just a little note to the participants. The moderators will pose 2 questions each to the speaker, and then take questions from the audience. The audience I see that there's a huge number of people, excellent, 110 participants. You can pose your questions in the chat box, or alternatively, after that, you could ask questions directly. So with that, I hand over to the 2 moderators.
May I speak first?
Please go ahead, Dr. Lochana.
Well, I think this was a wonderful presentation. I mean, an enormous task to condense into a short time the history of planning New Delhi. Now, I want to just say some of the things, a few of the things that are takeaways as far as I could see. I mean, the first one is about the failure of master planning. I mean, this is, I think, important for us to look at that, because master planning has to be recognized as a failure. It is recognized that way by most of the new thinking among urban planners as well, right? And the importance, I mean, the role of urban design, of what, I mean, can we kind of summarize, because it's such an important field. The role of urban design seems to be connected, from what I could gather in this lecture, to placemaking. I mean, the main function seems to be placemaking, which is not what planners have been doing for many decades. Now, there is the question of urban renewal and city development. That's another area which is a takeaway as far as I could find. And something that I would like to also submit a question about spontaneous development in regard to the creation of slums, and how does urban design try to deal with that? It's a major problem, and how it might deal with such a problem. So those are my brief reactions. There's much to be said on this wonderful lecture, but I will leave it at that to leave room for others to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Dr. Dasgupta gave a very a detailed description or a detailed elaboration of a city which is highly it's a city which has transformed into so many areas, starting from, I think, from being a main state like a state like Haryana, taking out New Delhi into a mega metropolis, and then how I think you went on describing all the aspects, like from how planning started, how it failed, and how they went back to take project by projects, areas by areas, and then to take, instead of planning, to take into mega projects. And I think the last 50, 60 years, I think India, maybe Delhi is a city which has transformed into almost all areas, like what you very correctly and very elaborately described. But still we are also struggling to find answers, I guess. And there are certain areas which we even today would like to find answers. I personally feel, I don't know whether I'm correct or not. Was it the 4 relays? Now, if you take, I don't know, for me, what I personally feel is it's a 4 into 100 relay kind of a thing. You have the planners, you have the urban designers, you have the architects and the landscape or the fine detailed stuff. Is it something where the baton is given from one to another? Is it giving was that a problem in the whole exercise? Planning, I think you all, I think, came out with all kinds of planning from yesteryear, all details of planning. Then where did planning go wrong? Was it the planners didn't give the baton at the right time or to the right person, the urban designers? And what happened from there? Did the urban designers take it through, or did the urban designers come much later in this? And was the architect given his role at the wrong point, whether the baton was given there at the wrong point? And also the infrastructure. That's another area which has to go through, I think, all 4 processes: planning, urban design, architecture, and into landscaping. And you touched about wetlands and flood mitigation and so on and so forth. So what is exactly, I don't know, for me, I personally feel that there is a baton drop somewhere, right, which would have brought all this, because in Sri Lanka also we also do find the same. We also find that we are also going in the same boat, or we are also going the same lines. We also find it this setup in the same way. When you were presenting your presentation, I just was just thinking, what is the role that we are playing over here? No different. We are also struggling for answers. We are struggling. We know the issues. We also see the questions and the issues that we have. So my question is it the baton not given at the right time to the right party? That's number one. The other one, whether the planning, in certain places you mentioned, I think that also came out in your speech several times, whether now planning is coming after a certain exercise is done, whether the function comes first and then the planning comes next. Is that also an answer to a certain extent? Can that also take another turn to this whole episode? And how did other cities, like, of course, you can't compare Singapore, it's a very small city, well planned. There, I think the 4 batons would have gone through one after the other in no time, in quick succession, and then the end product is there, being a very small space. And also, what you very correctly said, the community. Is the community playing a major role in a certain way? Either they are blocking planning or blocking some kind of a formula, a form that takes place, or that irregular way of bringing life a little bit into it. Say 50% planning, 50% of the day-to-day life to make it without being too rigid, getting into too form and shape or too disciplined, whether people are also allowed to play a role 60-40 or whatever. So those two were my main concerns, and how you would see those in your perspective. And I would also like to leave it to the other people. There are so many 100-odd people connected today. I think we should give them also a fair chance, since we have got this opportunity, a great opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Architect Harsha and Dr. Lochana. We can open the...
You want me to respond right now or later?
If yes. If you can respond now to the moderators.
Sure. Thank you, both of you, and both Mr. Gunaratna as well as Hashan ji. It is so nice of you to be able to connect with what I have been saying and also give very pertinent questions or observations on it. To respond to the first question by Mr. Lokana, the idea of spontaneous development within the city, or especially large cities like Delhi, as you know, has been an ever-recurring phenomenon. And it keeps on happening no matter how many trials are made to be able to try to control it or to try to redirect it. We have gone through a variety of, or let's say a long phase of evolution of how to define, first of all, such kind of settlements or habitations to strategies related to such habitations. There is obviously the first difference between the squatter and the slum, and the idea of squatting versus the idea of the slum as a condition of living. And that itself is the first kind of differentiation. And to say that if I'm squatting, I'm actually occupying a territory or a location in an unauthorized way. Whereas a slum need not necessarily be unauthorized, but I can have a very degraded living condition, even if it is authorized or if it is unauthorized. Now, the strategies for slum and squatters, usually the slums and squatters are synonymous with each other, because squatters as unauthorized settlements also have very degraded conditions. We used to start, and we had very strong episodes of slum clearance, as I showed you, especially when mega events and other kinds of events happened. But slum clearance had been one of the most significant ways in which the city was made sure to be to have the urban poor removed from at least the more important areas of the city. That was the initial strategy. Over time, we have now seen that the strategy has moved into a different form of coexistence, if one were to say it that way, when we are looking at rehabilitation in situ, where slums and squatters people are being allowed to rehabilitate themselves within where they are. And today, by legal backing, they are, even if they have to be shifted, there is a provision in the law that they cannot be shifted beyond a certain range that has been kept within the law, which is a range of around 5 kilometers from their original place of residence, even if they are an unauthorized group, right? So there is a certain kind of shift in strategy of trying to rehabilitate people where they are. Now, I think there was also, in the chat box, a certain question related to the pandemic and the post-pandemic situation. You must have seen all across the world that what the pandemic revealed in terms of the population of migrants who are in the city and the level of distress that happened because of that. Now, post-pandemic or during the pandemic itself, the government has started realizing the value of affordable rental housing for a low-income population within the premises of where they are located or within near locations as per law within the 5 kilometer radius of where they are located. So there is this experiment going on now of how can we create a scheme from the government side, and it is almost as if another kind of mission where now external population coming into the city will be given provision or facilitated by having access to shelter, at least in such kind of what is called affordable rental housing schemes. In fact, that is what has been named by the government of India now. This is a very recent phenomenon, but it has started coming into shape, and designers have come up to try and help out in making this into a possibility of relocation within the same area, right? And both in terms of academic work, as well as in some levels of work through civil society organizations in different parts of the country, there has been some genesis of success or limited success in this manner. And I think it has probably brought in a new hope that there is a way forward in which the urban poor will get addressed over time. So that is one of the ways in which this question of spontaneous versus the formal development is trying to get bridged. In other forms of spontaneous development, or even, let's say, pre-planned development like urban villages, in the current master plan, in the 2041 master plan, which is yet to be formalized, there is a very strong input on urban regeneration policies, and whether there can be ways in which areas could be designated which have either gone into blight or are facing problems of various kinds, which can be brought into the purview of selective regeneration and redevelopment, and through various players. And that includes the developers who would like to come into and play a role in affordable housing provisions through urban regeneration systems. In fact, the 2041 master plan for the first time makes a departure from an expansionist way of looking at the city to looking inwards into the city and trying to see what can be done from within. So land pooling, urban regeneration, new ways of trying to find delineated zones of direct attention, I think is what the present MPD, that is MPD 2041, is trying to promote. And this is a departure. This is a clear departure from what has been there before. In this master plan, it seems to be that there is a larger recognized role of how designers can work with brownfield situations. Planners have not been trained really to work with the brownfield. They have been trained to work with greenfield zones where new laws and new planning regulations can be put into practice. But our cities are already built up and they have lived their life. And many parts of the cities have either lived their lives or need to have serious engagement of design. And I think now the planning mechanism is slowly realizing the benefit of it, or benefit of having designers or experts who can work with the brownfield situation. So that's a response that I had for Mr. Lokana. I'm sure if there is any other thought associated with it, I'll be happy to extend this. Harshanji, your question of the relay race was very intriguing. And I think that is a very nice way to put it. It's something that has also made me think. First of all, is it a relay or is it a flat race where everybody is racing, right? That's important to be understood, whether the planners are racing against the architects are racing with the landscape architects. That's something that we need to keep thinking also, right? And if it was a relay and if it happened sequentially, it would have been a different kind of a smoothness in the development process. I don't think that smoothness is visible yet. But I think there is another player. This is not in a 4 into 100. There is a 5 into 100 at least, as far as experts are concerned. And this player is the development engineer or the infrastructure engineer, right? The infrastructure engineer has very close relationship with project patronizers, right? Be it the government, with the private sector, with anyone else. And I think that is the project engineer, or let's say the development engineer or the infrastructure engineer, plays a very tremendous role in shaping the way in which development funding will be put into projects in cities. So the metro is not necessarily a spatial design exercise. This metro is an infrastructural engineering exercise, and that has spatial ramifications. So the lead person in the relay race is always the engineer, and then the engineer's actions or the engineer's way of dealing with the city, in a way, gets picked up by the planner, the architect, and everybody else later on. And that is why I am saying that the projectizing the city has become the way in which development processes have now got unfolded. We are not now having projects following the plan. So the master plan is keeping on trying to keep pace with the huge array of development projects. I talked to you about the railways. The railways are not part of a city master plan. Anyway, railway land is over and above, because it's national property, is over and above the local property or the local jurisdiction of the planning authority. But the railways have started becoming a very big player. And so also the metro authorities themselves. And many of these very big extra urban players are shaping the urban developmental scenario. And they are all led very strongly by the engineer. Now, beyond the engineer, there are two groups of people who are very strongly embedded with each other, especially in the global city discussion. And here we are talking about the development financer and the development consultant. Now, you cannot do any such kind of large-scale project without a financial, map. And I think that is where the real decisions get determined in terms of priorities. Where will the development financier invest? And how will the development consultant use that investment to finally realize a dream of the city or of the dream of the nation is, I think, where the primary decisions are getting taken up first. And then there is a question of the demarcated role of the individual professionals. I would like to see a more seamless, first of all, not a race, but at least a seamless collective enterprise of a team of consultants playing their individual roles together. The landscape architect, the urban designer, and the planner have their own individual roles, and also, I think, scales of operation, right? We find that there is a certain scale in which the planner's role becomes dominant. And there is a more micro scale where the architect, the urban designer, and the architect and the landscape architect's role become dominant. And this scalar division of roles, or let's say scalar contribution of roles, should be recognized and put into the framework, right? And for me, that would probably become a very strong way in which to reformulate this idea of a team-based representation of consultancy that can happen for the city together. And today we find that landscape architects are not limited only to microspace design, but they're actually talking about large ecological processes, simultaneously with the micro scale. So there is a lot of to and fro, or an oscillation of scales that happen at any consultant's table or in the practice that they have. And to embrace it and to figure out which team works at which scale probably will be one of the ways to put together what you call as this relay, right? So I feel that is a very important thing. The urban designer, unfortunately, was not a recognized participant in the relay, right? So there was a giant leap from the engineer to the planner to the architect, right? And at times, not even the architect, directly to the engineer on ground, right? Not even at the development consultancy level. And that giant leap, I think, had to be bridged somewhere. And that's where I think the space of the urban designer, as I said, as an in-between discipline, has such a pivotal role to play. That's what I felt there. And as I said, and you very rightly said, that planning is following policy and projects, right? And I hope it can be reversed over time. And like Professor Lokana said, that maybe master planning is probably not the answer. Looking at the present and the near future is very important than looking only at long-term futures. Within 20 years, the city of Delhi is already changing in leaps and bounds year to year. So by the time the 20th year comes, the city has already changed. So we are then again playing a catch-up role rather than a determining role. So I think it's important to have that idea of planning for a near future rather than the far future. So that's another point that I had. And to the extent of community's role in it, the community have played a role in different, at different levels. Because see, the community which is formally recognized as well as has access to the benefits of the planning process have always supported the planning mechanism the way it has unfolded. But there is a larger or a very large fraction of the community who do not either understand the planning process or are not necessarily getting the benefit of attention from the planning process. Now, those communities still deserve their right to exist in the city, right? And we are a democracy and we cannot stop people at the gates of the city. So the citizens come into the city and they hope that the city will take care of their needs, but they realize that some dimensions of planning have not necessarily recognized them as rightful entities. And that is when the entire process of squatting starts, unauthorized development starts, and many other processes start, which at the local level, we don't have a document to control. Because at local level, there is no planning document which says this is what should be and this is what should not be. So any available leftover property and land is then getting taken up out of need for all this external or this extra population that the planning mechanism had not necessarily comprehended or catered to. We call them in our academic research as well as in our lab innovation exercises, we call them the less catered community, right? And this is a very large community, but we haven't been able to take care of it. I think urban designers have a role to play there. And that's why I feel now that it's no longer place making that only can define the urban designer's role, but more about how community-based needs and aspirations can be realized at local levels through urban design planning convergences. That's what I feel here. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm giving long answers to short questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dasgupta, for your very detailed responses, yes. Would you like to take there are some questions in the chat box. Do you want me to read it out or would you take it from the first?
Go ahead, Michelle. So you can.
Yeah. Okay, but the first question is, how did Delhi manage land ownership and inform land occupation issues when restructuring urban space under TOD? This is from Ranjit Pereira.
Delhi, if you know, had a legacy of most of its land as part of leasehold land. It was not freehold, but leasehold. And that leasehold aspect of land holding itself had its own issues and repercussions. In a way, having land trapped as leasehold land where free market forces were not allowed to operate for long periods of time, in fact, decades, made the land speculation rate become very high in the land market. And that is one of the reasons that is being talked about as the problem of the scarcity of land in terms for affordable classes. Now, today, most of the land has been converted from leasehold to freehold. There is a mechanism put into place where such kind of leasehold land could have been converted. And in the freehold land, now market forces have stepped into the process here. In the TOD policy, land is still seen as both government-owned as well as privately owned. There is a mechanism now that any kind of land holding and property would have the different or differentiated bylaws of the way in which it can develop. So a certain parcel of land, depending on its size, is now allowed to be amalgamated with other land parcels to create a minimum quantum of land where you can either self-build or attract private investment to build for you. And that is how there is this land pooling and and land amalgamation, policies that have started getting added on with the TOD policy as well as many other urban project policy. And today we are seeing this to be even more and more in force in the urban situation. Earlier, we could not amalgamate any plot with any other plot in the city anywhere. No, now we can do so. And neither could any one person pool the land where it has either already got built or got or has got development possibilities. But both such mechanisms have been put in the framework in the TOD policy also, as well as in the new planning policy or the new planning document that we are going to have. But they have differentiated bylaws related to land parcel sizes, what we call as block sizes, as well as the nature of the use that will happen. And very recently, we have started putting in vertical zoning as one of the ways of doing land use distribution, and not just the horizontal land use classification that we had before. In TOD areas, vertical zoning has started becoming a point to recognize. And also with the railway station property development areas, we are seeing that form-based coding has started getting introduced in the way it will shape development.
Yes, next question is from Ananda Gamage. How should we relook at urban design following the pandemic?
So that's a very significant question. And the only thing that we can say is that we are trying to find ways in which we become relevant for the city as well as communities during and after the pandemic. I was giving you examples of community-oriented urban design studio projects that we've been doing over the past few years. Those projects were at the ward level earlier. After the pandemic struck, we have our students now spread all over the country, and every student have their own locality within which they are situated. And in this locality where they are now playing the role of becoming the facilitative creative designer, where the locality and the student as a designer will start coming and discussing the post-pandemic re-emergence of that locality. We had done it the last year for 25 localities in 28 cities in the country. And we found out that if you are able to embed the designer within the locality and the community, there is a way in which we can understand the processes of how the locality functions, what the pandemic did to change the everyday functioning of it, and what all mechanisms of resilience have to be pushed into that local level to make the locality become more and more self-sufficient when the pandemic strikes again, if at all. The designer's role there is paramount because he or she can understand the way the people move, the kind of distribution of amenities, the very significant way in which a locality either has access to primary healthcare or lack of healthcare, and many others. So we are doing a mapping exercise, locality by locality, to see how they can be assessed for a pandemic condition and a post-pandemic re-emergence. So in my mind, it is this designer community interface, right, happening in the most micro level of localities that can bring about the possibility of a pandemic resilience, right, or a pandemic-oriented resilience. So that's the approach we have taken. We are also working with the city authorities to find out whether at the policy level, some changes can be done, some things can be done. But I must say here that as of now, there are, in our department, we have a center, as you know, the Center of Urban Design Innovation, where we are running the City Futures Lab around this idea about the post-pandemic world and the post-pandemic city that we are going to work with. And that's where we are looking at every element of a local condition, including the bus stand, or even a post office, or even a small center of distribution, whether they can play multiple roles and not just the singular role that it was defined earlier. And whether that role can then be networked through various kinds of online networking with the locality to say that this is what we can serve when there is a resurgence of this kind of a crisis. So these are some of the aspects that we're working on, and I'm sure that urban designers will become pivotal in this post-pandemic re-emergence.
Next question is from Vita Janpal. Can I know about whether India has a national spatial plan, including all states?
No, India doesn't have a national spatial plan. We had what was called the National Commission of Urbanization long back, right? But an urban development policy, as we hear it, is in the making. And that is something that we are waiting to know more about. The National Commission of Urbanization had stalwarts like Charles Correa heading the commission. And that commission had, at that point of time, in the 1970s, put in place in the 1980s, sorry, put in place very strong mechanisms of how the distribution of urbanization or the urbanization process in the country will unfold. So that there is a more holistic, or let's say a larger picture of how urban centers and their roles will be played. But ever since then, there has not been too much of discussion happening at the national level.
The next question is from Engineer Dr. Tissal anyway, and this is a rather lengthy response to your presentation and also the question. I'll quickly read it. Mr. Dasgupta, thank you very much for the descriptive presentation explaining insight of the various parts of India in urban design point of view. I can see great difference from 2005 and now in Delhi, where no metro was there at that time. I also visited Mumbai in 2008 and observed the very risky transport systems that were there. The road safety was very pathetic. How do you compare the funding availability for commercial city development in Mumbai and the administration interaction concepts that leads Delhi to Delhi to fund for infrastructure better than commercial province of Mumbai, and how the government managed the funding balance from different GDP without being unfair to the earnings of those living in the two cities? So it's a rather long, but it has a lot of...
It is a long question and a very intricate thought.
Yes.
Thank you for that. But the only thing that I can say is that urban development funding is handled through a central mechanism first, especially after the missions, as you heard in my talk, came into being. From the missions onwards, the shift from the rural to the urban became very clear in terms of the larger GDP allocation. And the JNNURM mission, the National Urban Renewal Mission, became the first way in which central funds will be pushed into the states as well as in the city domains. Earlier, urban development was also only a state subject. And it is still so in terms of governance. But the funding started becoming more from the central to the city once the missions came in. And the thing about the missions was that it did not distinguish only from the big city to the small city, right? The smart city mission, for example, has a competitive mode to selecting which city will get funding. And there's a intercity competition that is held for getting the funding for the smart city. And that is how smart city missions are getting allocated in terms of funding. And that could be the smallest city of any state, not even Mumbai or Delhi. So I think there has been a difference from the earlier allocation of having a lot of funds kept for the capital city and then the other metropolises. But now I think there is a larger, wider distribution of funds happening across the various scales of urban centers. But there is always this situation of the capital city getting the pick of attention, and it does so still. I think with respect to safety and mobility, Mumbai is doing very strong, has taken very strong steps. In fact, the Mumbai master plan has had its own, turmoil through history, but it takes into cognizance more and more dimensions of how the citizen and the city of that size and complexity can come to terms with each other. So I think we are looking at better prospects, right? And in every city, and I think cities like Bengaluru and many other smaller, less mega cities have started showing the way forward in balancing developmental priorities as well as larger questions of ecology and environment simultaneously. So I think there is some movement and momentum getting built.
I think the second part also was on the metro links introduced. What changes happened to the public transport share compound compared with theirs? Was there a reduction of the car and motorbike users in the pollution level in Delhi? That helped to maintain the city and keep it clean?
No, so very clearly the mobility, the modal share has not got skewed towards public transport as much as one would have thought it to be. See, there was a very strong latent demand on public transport or on public transportation or public means of transportation, which Delhi was not able to cater to before. And that latent demand got harnessed and got channelized by the metro coming into being. There has been a lot of reduction, let's say, in the way in which the two-wheeler riders or commuters have shifted from two-wheelers to the metro. But the demand of movement is such and huge, so huge, that it has still not made a decipherable change in the road space occupancy of all kinds of modes of automobile, right from the two-wheeler to the four-wheelers. And that my view is that if the metro started as an intra-city mode of transport, the modal shift would have been much more visible. And Delhiites would have had the benefit of being able to make some of these choices. But now we have a regional catchment of the metro. And that's why we are seeing more and more people using the metro, as well as more and more people using the roads. So we have not really solved the problem, at least in Delhi. We'll have to see whether it works better in Mumbai or in any other city, where many cities are now getting into the metro regime.
Next question is from Hiranti Velandawa. What do you think is the best tool for city intervention to create memorable urban spaces? Is it through top-down physical interventions like transport, or only through new urban projects?
No, the transport is also a new urban project, but I think it's a question of scale, right? Large-scale transportation projects will probably always happen depending on the larger idea of the demand that the city has. And obviously, at that scale, there will be a systemic decision of what kind of systems will be put in place to take care of the larger mobility and transportation requirements and demands, both passenger as well as goods. But placemaking happens irrespective of any kind of systemic insert that the city is going to get into. So any transportation system will give rise to changes in the city. These changes have to be guided and necessarily channelized so that we don't create problems that we see today without any kind of design inputs. That's something that we can do. So every transit point is a placemaking potential exercise. And that's what I think we would have wanted to see. As I said, that we looked at 40 stations and we tried to put in place some design mechanisms for it. And I think that that's where we will bridge this relationship between a systems design or a policy design idea with a placemaking realization of that idea. That has to happen simultaneously. It's not this or that.
There's a question from Playana Aarti. There are some village settlements in India So what kind of urban design solutions that you have imposed to market the identity of the traditional villages, even though these are considered as unique elements of the city? As designers, we give our concerns to design for urban areas. So as urban planners and urban designers, what can we do to market or promote village character?
That's a question which is very close to my heart, because as I had mentioned before, I believe that urban design doesn't only get limited to cities. Our rural areas is 2/3 of our population, and they are fast progressing towards the urban. Every rural area has the aspiration of wanting to be. Is what I think designers have to constantly work with.
Okay, there's 3 thank you notes and 1 last question. The thank you notes are from Architect Ananda Gamage. Thank you very much, Dr. Dasgupta, for your very detailed presentation and answers. And thank you, Dr. Janak and the entire team. Then Pushpa Gamage says, thank you, Dr. Dasgupta, for your detailed presentation. Thanks, everyone. And the other one is from Champaka, Dr. Dasgupta. Thank you very much for your nice and valuable presentations. Thank you. And the last question is again from engineer, Tissalian again. It's a little long. Would you want me to read it and answer? It's also on CUDi.
Maybe the question probably.
Yeah, it's as in other Asian countries, there are some elevated roads and highways that bring some negative impacts to the urban architect in Delhi too, as per some pictures I observed in the studies. What is your recommendation for having urban elevated highways and its sustainability contribution to the urban transportation needs? How can this compete with public transport in modern cities? And then thanking you for answering his questions.
Okay. No, I agree with you, first of all, that elevated corridors of movement, whether it is the metro, whether it is the automobile, have shaped and reshaped the urban form of our cities all through time. And after the elevated corridor, metro corridor came into being, we realized the magnitude of impact that it might have on our general expression of the city and its experience. It has done many things. I think the idea that flyovers solve traffic problems in traffic junctions, I think it has now been questioned, and critically so. And we have realized now that flyovers are not necessarily solving the problems of overall mobility. It just transfers the problem from one junction to another junction where the flyover comes and falls down, and the next junction then has a pileup of vehicles which it has not got designed for. So this idea that flyovers will leapfrog the problem is, I think, something that is getting dawned, more and more. But elevated corridors have worked in places where there are highway towns, right? Where the earlier urban life along a highway had got severely impaired when the expressway started bifurcating the town. That's when the elevated expressway became a possible solution, because it was not possible to get enough land and resources to bypass the town horizontally. So what it actually did is to allow the through vehicular movement to move up on the corridor, and the urban movement or the local level movement to continue below and across the corridor that was running through it. So in some ways, the highway towns, in my opinion, have got some benefit. But in the larger cities or in the other forms of cities, we realize that the expressways and the highways that have come into town, again, as I said, that it is a lineage from the urban infrastructural decision. They happen, and then we have to deal with it. So what we want to focus on is the negative space that gets created within and below these elevated areas. We are trying to find new meaning in those spaces. We would call them urban voids. And today we feel that they can also become part of some very meaningful possibilities below them and around them. So we are looking at all kinds of possibilities in this situation of what happens under a flyover. Should that be a place for the shelterless? Should there be a place for emergency vehicles and their parking? should there be many other possibilities of linking it back with the neighborhood that surrounds them, right? In terms of small recreational amenities and facilities. These are things that we are working on at micro scale when it comes to such kind of, large infrastructural inserts into the city.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akbar. That is a very extensive answer session. I think it almost came to your speech session as well, but it was a cross section for everybody. Answers had got answers to their questions. So thank you very much, and we now run over our time limit. So I think that's it for the questions. And without much ado, I will now, to wind up this evening's procedure, let me hand over the proceedings to Architect Pradeep Fernando, the Honorary Secretary of the IUDSL. Over to you, Pradeep.
Thank you, Michelle. Once again, we have come to a very interesting and a very informative presentation. And I think today there was a large number of participants for this web conference. And we would like to thank our keynote speaker, Dr. Arunava Dasgupta, for that very insightful presentation, for enlightening all of us on the concurrent issues of Asian cities. To New Delhi, which is confronted by most Asian cities, and the strategic development scenario to combat this issue of urban sprawl and urban development, and how we as professionals can come on board and mitigate these issues for the present users as well as the futuristic users. And I would like to thank all the distinguished guests, the special invitees, and members from other institutions, the members of the Institute of Urban Designers of Sri Lanka, and the students and all participants who took part in this event. And as I have been assigned to wind up the proceedings with the short vote of thanks of the Institute of Urban Designers, I'd like to thank all of you for your participation to make this event a glorious success. And also we would like to thank our panel of moderators, well-known personnel, Dr. Lochana Gunaratha, architect planner, who have been a senior member in the Institute of Architects and the Institute of Planners, who have been helpful in numerous ways, who had given a valuable contribution, not only for this event, but for the respective professions and for guiding students. And architect, urban designer Harshan De Silva, and we'd like to congratulate him on his new appointment. He had been very instrumental in bringing our institute to a different height, to gear it to greater heights. And I'd like to thank him for all the coming on board as a moderator and getting all these questions from all the participants to enhance our knowledge. And also would like to thank Michelle for comparing the event. And also lastly, would like to say whoever who's interested in getting a certificate for participation, we could do that. The institute could do that at a very nominal fee. So let us know if you all need that. Thank you very much and good night, everyone.